Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of Bios and Bookmarks powered by the NGC Bocas Lit Fest. I'm Shivani Ramlochan, and I'm really excited to be joined today by P. Djèlí Clark. P. Shall I call you P or P Jelly? Welcome. Welcome to Bios and Bookmarks. It's really great to have you here.
Hello, thank you for having me. P is fine. That's
So,
fine. The P also starts with Fenderson. If you want to say that whole name, that was my grandfather's first name, you can say Fenderson, but some people say Fen. That's easy. It might be easier.
I like that there's so many variants to choose from.
Yeah, all these,
So,
yes.
this is Fenderson's first appearance on the NGC Bocas Lit Fest platform, so I want to big that up. It's really special that he's joining us from somewhere that is infinitely colder than it is in Trinidad, from what I understand.
Much. Snow everywhere. Snow everywhere here. Yeah.
My goodness. So, P. Djèlí Clark is the award-winning author of The Black God's Drums, The Haunting of Tramcar 015, and most recently, Ring Shout, published by Tor.com Publishing. He's also a founding editor of Fire Literary Magazine. And we're here to talk today about Ring Shout, which is, I mean, you'll rarely hear me say you've never read anything quite like this, but Bios and Bookmarks family, you've never read anything quite like Ring Shout. It is spectacular and visceral cosmic horror that completely puts Lovecraft in his own dirty little dismal corner to think about what he's done. And I am so excited to hear Fenderson read from Ring Shout for us. So without further ado, I'm going to invite you to do that now.
Oh, sure. Definitely. Have my own copy. This is, I call this my daughter's copy. She likes to run around with this copy and all around the house. She's 2. So she's not reading it, but she does like looking at the cover for some reason. So let me read from this work. I'm going to read from the beginning. Ring Shout, or Hunting Ku Kluxes in the End Times. That is the name of the book. And I will start at chapter 1. You ever seen a Klan march? We don't have them as grand in Macon like you might see in Atlanta, but there's clans enough in this city of 50-odd thousand to put on a full march when they get the feeling to. This one on a Tuesday, the 4th of July, which is today. There's a bunch parading down 3rd Street wearing white robes and pointed hoods. Not a one got their face covered. I hear the first clans after the Civil War hid behind pillowcases and flour sacks to do their mischief, even blackened up to play like they colored. But this Klan we got in 1922, not concerned with hiding. All of them, men, women, even little baby clans, down there grinning like picnic on a Sunday. Got all kinds of fireworks, sparklers, Chinese crackers, skyrockets, and things that sound like cannons. A brass band competing with that racket, though everybody down there, I swear, clapping on the 1 and the 3. With all the flag waving and cavorting, you might forget they was monsters. But I hunt monsters, and I know them when I see them. One little Ku Klux dead, a voice hums near my ear. 2 little Kluxes dead, 3 little Kluxes, 4 little Kluxes, 5 little Kluxes dead. I glanced at Sadie crouched beside me, hair pulled into a long brown braid dangling off her shoulder. She got one eye cocked, staring down the sights on her rifle at the crowd below as she finishes her ditty, pretending to pull the trigger. Click, 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 click. Stop that now. I push away the rifle barrel with a beaten up book. That thing go off and you're liable to make me deaf. Besides, somebody might catch sight of us. Sadie rolls big brown eyes at me, twisting her lips and lobbing a spitty mess of tobacco onto the rooftop. I grimace. Girl got some disgusting habits. I swear, Maurice Boudreau. She slings her rifle across blue overalls too big for her skinny self and puts hands to her hips to give me the full Sadie treatment, looking like some irate yellow gal sharecropper. The way you always worrying, is you 25 or 85? Sometimes I forget. Ain't nobody seeing us way up here but birds. She gestures out at buildings rising higher than the telegraph lines of downtown Macon. We up on one of the old cotton warehouses off Poplar Street. Way back, This whole area housed cotton coming in from countryside plantations to send down to Okmulgee by steamboat. That fluffy white soaked in slave sweat and blood, what made this city. Nowadays, Macon warehouses still hold cotton, but for local factory mills and railroads. Watching these clans shamble down the street, I'm reminded of bales of white, still soaked in colored folks' sweat and blood, moving for the river. Not too sure about that, Chef puts in. She sits with her back against the rooftop wall, dark lips curled around the butt of a Chesterfield in a familiar, easy smirk. Back in the war, we always watch for snipers. Keep one eye on the mud, one in front, and both up top, Sergeant used to say. Somebody yells sniper, and we scampered quick. Beneath a narrow mustard brown army cap, her eyes tighten and the smirk wavers. She pulls out the cigarette, exhaling a white stream. Hated fucking snipers. This ain't no war, Sadie retorts. We both look at her funny. I mean, it ain't that kind of war. Nobody down there watching for snipers. Besides, only time you see Winnie is before she put one right between the eyes. She taps her forehead and smiles crookedly, a wad of tobacco bulging one cheek. Sadie's no sniper, but she ain't lying. Girl can shoot the wings off a fly. Never one day in Uncle Sam's army neither, just hunting with her grandpappy in Alabama. Winnie is her Winchester 1895, with a walnut stock, an engraved slate gray receiver, and a 24-inch barrel. I'm not big on guns, but got to admit, that's one damn pretty killer. All this waiting making me fidgety, she huffs, pulling at the red and black checkered shirt under her overalls. And I can't pass time reading fairy tales like Maurice. Folk tales. I hold up my book. Say so right on the cover. Whichever. Stories about Bruh Fox and Bruh Bear sound like fairy tales to me. Better than those trashy tabloids you like, I retort. Been told y'all there's truth in there. Just you watch. Anyway, when we gonna kill something? This taking too long. Can't argue there. Been 3/4 of an hour now, we out here, and this making sun ain't playing at midday. My nice plaited and pinned up hair done gone damp beneath my tan newsboy cap. Perspiration sticking my striped white shirt to my back, and these gray wool knickers ain't much better. Prefer a summer dress loose on my hips I can breathe in. Don't know how men stay all confined like this. Chef stands, dusting off and taking a last savoring drag on the Chesterfield before stamping it beneath a faded Persian boot. I'm always impressed by her height, taller than me certainly, and some men for that matter. She lean too, all dark long legs and arms, fitted into a tan combat tunic and breeches. Imagine the Kaiser's men must have choked on their sauerkraut, seeing her and the black rattlers charging in the moose gone. In the trenches, only thing living besides us was lice and rats. Lice was damn useless. Rats you could eat. Just had to know the proper bait and trap. Sadie gags like she swallowed a tobacco. Cordelia Lawrence, of all the nasty stories you done told about that nasty war, that is by far the nastiest. Cordy, you ate rats? Chef just chuckles before walking off. Sadie looks to me, mimicking throwing up. I tighten the laces on my green gaiters before standing and stuff my book into a back pocket. When I reach Chef, she's the other end of the roof, peering off the ledge. Like I say, she picks up again. You want to catch a rat, get the right bait and trap. Then you just wait him out. Sadie and I follow her gaze to the alley tucked behind the building, away from the parade and where nobody likely to come. On the ground is our bait, a dog carcass. It's been cut to pieces, the innards spilled out bloody and pink on the paving stones amid charred black fur. The stink of it carries even up here. And I'm going to pause there and I'll pick up for the rest of the reading after.
Wow, thank you so much for that. As many of you joining us will know, the theme of this seasons of Bios and Bookmarks is crime and wonderment. We're taking a close look at how Caribbean authors and authors in the diaspora write about criminality and violence, both close to and far away from home, and how that lives alongside speculative fiction, which we've always had in our region and beyond. And I think a book like Ring Shout, which again I want to emphasize for anyone joining us now, is a book you can't predict or expect, and that's part of its beauty and its power. There is a way in which it does both. Looks at crime, some of the most insidious violence against Black bodies and the Black imagination, and also makes so much room for the speculative, for wonder, and a strange and compelling sort of joy. So, as I was speaking with Fenderson just before we went live, reminiscing on the beauty of Trinidad Carnival and Mass, Fenderson grew up,
Mm.
was born in the States, but spent a lot of his formative years in Trinidad and Tobago, which is the birthplace of his parents. And because of that,
I'm sorry, we may have lost the connection a bit. You frozen on my end, so you were just about to say something about Trinidad Carnival. I'm going to wait and hopefully you come back.
oh, I think we're having some slight technical difficulties. Just let me know when you return and you can hear me okay, Fenderson, because I think we may have lost him just briefly. Okay, I think you're back, so you can go ahead and unmute. Hey, welcome back. You just want to go ahead and unmute for us?
There we go. I'm back.
Okay.
Weren't we
Thank
just
you.
saying that everything that goes wrong can possibly go wrong? I
That's
have
the
no idea what's happening.
that's the beauty of live programming, folks. I
Of
think it's
course.
the power of the Trinidad Mass just making
It must
itself
be. It
present.
must
Like
be. It must be.
Carnival
There's,
misses us as much as we miss it and
there's
wants
some
to
jab in here messing with us or something.
exactly wants to exude its power in the space.
Exactly. Exactly. It's
So
chaos.
before the spirit of carnival stole you, right? I was saying to our audience that you were born in the US, but spent
Hmm.
so much of your time in as a young person, and not that you're an old person now,
Oh, I am. I'm old now.
as
Yeah.
a less young person in Trinidad and Tobago, which is
Yeah.
where your parents are from. And
Yes.
that, in the context of reading Ring Shout, made me just have to ask you how important it's been, maybe it's always been, to have the Caribbean folkloric and ritualistic embedded in the work you do. I mean, we see it in Ring Shout, and
Hmm.
I'm struck very forcefully by how you make space on the page for that. If we could talk about that a bit.
Yeah. I mean, I think definitely. The answer is just yes. Um, I was born in New York, and I didn't. It's funny. I spent maybe 6 years of my early life in Trinidad. I was sent back uh, for health reasons to live with my grandparents before, I think, after the age of 1. And so, I went through first standard there, and I did early schooling there, and I lived with my grandparents in Chagonas. And I guess if people were to ask me, like, people always ask, like, where did you get an interest in science fiction and folklore? And I was like, there. I
At
live with
home.
at home. Yeah, I lived in a community where I heard like African diasporic folklore of Jumbi and everything else, and I also grew up in a vibrant Hindu community that was, bringing in all of these other stories and everything else. So like all of that was just my early upbringing, and so the world to me growing up was magical in a way, right? There was always, worried about doing or something like that, or
Mhm.
Sukiyan. That was just, my grandmother was an Anglican woman who still made certain that she closed the windows, and she would tell me, if the dogs are barking, the witches are out at night. She would make me turn around if I was sleeping the wrong way because I was sleeping like the dead, or, and tell me all these things. So to me, the world was just always full of this folklore. And even when I came to the States, my parents grew up in Trinidad themselves. And so my mother especially was one who carried a lot of these things with her. And so when I got to the States, I would say my interest in that kind of speculative understanding grew, being introduced to a lot of you know, American science fiction and those kinds of things through television and what have you. But I always say it was born when I was in Trinidad. That's where I think it came to me, from carnival costumes. I still remember. I'm old enough to I'm old enough to when I was used to be a kid in carnival. Remember in carnival that everybody was still making their own costumes. So
Mm-hmm.
I remember just a magical feel of just seeing all the little sequins would be all over the place on the streets, in the canal and everything when I was smaller. And you know how, and seeing the costumes and going out and seeing Jab and seeing, you know, dragons and all this and bats, and how all of that just, you know, I think just sparked my imagination. And so I do think I bring it into anything I write. I'm glad you noticed it in Ring Shout. I think we lived in New York, but then we moved down south, and I think there was a way that being in the South, some of that folklore was so similar. Some of the traditions were so similar in of African Americans in the American South, that there were commonalities I immediately saw. And so when I'm drawing on those bits of African American folklore, I'm also translating them through that, you know, Caribbean upbringing and that Caribbean folklore. So I try to meld the two best way I can.
I mean, that's a beautiful reflection
Uh,
on, you know, a Carnival Sunday that feels very strange here in Trinidad. I think it's a powerful reminder that Carnival cannot be canceled. You know, Carnival
yeah.
can be transmuted and alchemized, both of
Hmm.
which, you know, transmutation and alchemy are important to the
Yeah.
world of Ring Shout, not for
Hmm.
nothing. But you can't kill the carnival. It's
No,
impossible. So
no, it's
thank you for
impossible.
that beautiful reminder through what you've shared. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
Ring Shout kind of catapults us into this time that I think for a lot of contemporary readers, it does not feel so urgent, like the world of 1922,
Right.
Macon,
Yeah.
Georgia. But nothing ever felt more contemporary in the process of reading it, more
I know.
fully
Yeah.
actualized on the page. I felt like I could be on the fringes of that world as a non-Black person, but a person of color, and inhabit the action and the atmosphere and the emotion so
Hmm.
palpably. And reading Ring Shout is a lesson in ardent note keeping. There was something on almost every page that made me want to run to an encyclopedia or run to a history book to
Good.
understand the world better and to live in it more fully, which is why it was so beautiful to reach the
Hmm.
end of the book and see how much you credited as a book of many parts, many
Yeah.
sources of influence, the Gullah
Hmm.
Geechee people and the actual act of ring shouting, the
Hmm.
the real and literal truth of powerful Black female ancestors in history, the night doctors. There are so many sources,
Yeah.
so many threads on which the book pulls. And I was curious about if, for you, in constructing the world, there was a
Hmm.
thread that emerged to you first out of all of them, a way, like a
Yeah.
clearing that was the actual very beginning of the book.
Yeah. And that's. I'm glad you noticed all that. I'm glad you picked up on those things, because yes, I put a little bit. I'm a historian by trade.
Mm-hmm.
That's my day job, and so it's always a balance of how much can I put in here and still make it entertaining. That people aren't
Mm-hmm.
like, wait a minute, this is a history book. Get this out of here. You know, this isn't what I came for. And so, but I mean, it's just natural that I try to throw those things in there. So thank you
You're
for
welcome.
recognizing them. I love it. Um, and so yeah, I think if I were to say when the first inkling of the story took place, before I knew it was going to be a story, was before I completed my doctorate. I got a master's degree first. I did it the long way, so I got an MA. This was many years ago. I want to say like what like almost 14 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So long roots. And so I got my master's degree, and I what I started to study on was I looked at enslaved women's lives and resistance in a set of ex-slave narratives known as the WPA slave narratives. And what they are were in the 1930s or so, 1920s, 1930s, interviewers with the United States government, as well as from some historically Black universities in the United States, went through the South, and they went interviewing the last surviving generation of African Americans who had been enslaved, right? Which can still exist, right? Different in the West Indies where slavery ends in 1834, but you add the extra 30 years, and there are still people who are elderly, but who existed during that last, who are alive during those last years of American slavery before the Civil War and then into Reconstruction. And it was in reading their accounts that just by chance, I came across their recollections of the first Ku Klux Klan, right? Because the Klan comes in different iterations. We can talk about that later, but the first Ku Klux Klan that comes about after the American Civil War. And when they talk about this first Klan, they describe them as monsters, right? They call them haints, which are, I guess that's the Southern American version of Jumbi, same kind of thing, like a wicked or malicious type of spirit, right? They say that the first Klan didn't wear hoods like we think of. They sometimes wore cloth sacks over their faces, or sometimes they blackened their faces. So I thought that was interesting. Or they wore horns or pretended they had tails and would have chains that they would rattle and do all of these bizarre things. And it was from their writings, their own ideas of folklore, that they were going to try to remember this terror that they'd gone through and write it in a folkloric sense by speaking of the Klan as almost supernatural. There were even supernatural ways to stop them, and things you could do, like laying out certain vines, or they couldn't cross water, these kinds of things. And so when I first read that, I didn't know Ring Shout was in the work, in the offing. That took many years, 10 years later before I came up with the idea. But I immediately jotted that down, and I credit that with the beginning of the story. By the time I sat down and I wanted to write Ring Shout, which was much more recently, maybe 5 years or so ago, I immediately drew back to that information that I had jotted down. Those notes, like you said, jotting down notes that I had kept somewhere. I went and I found them, and I was like, because I wanted to do this Southern Gothic story, and I wanted monsters, and I said, wait a minute, I have monsters. Those ex-slaves who had given their narratives, they created the monsters for me. And so I went back there. And so if I have to credit that first thread, it's there. And just a reminder that you never know where inspiration is going to come from. You never know when you're going to use that inspiration, right? I sat on it for 10 years before I decided to touch it.
I mean, myself and tens of thousands of other readers around the literal world, I think we're all glad that you did, that it came back to you in that way and
Yeah.
resonated, and took the time that it took, I suppose. I
Yeah.
want to shout out everyone who's in the comment section. Thank you so much for being here. You have here, Fenderson, some OG fans of the book, and
Oh,
I
that's
think of
good.
your
Good.
writing. You have a comment from Ayana Jillian Lloyd, who throws it
Oh,
all the way back and says,
yeah.
so been looking forward to this. Been a fan since I read The Secret Lives of the 9 Negro Teeth of George Washington.
Yeah. Thank you. And I know I'm from Facebook, so thank you.
And a lovely comment from the excellent Rebel Women Lit, who are always doing impressive and powerful work for Caribbean readers and writers. And they say, Ring Shout is one of the tiniest books in our library, and yet it has the most annotations. And
Oh,
a weepy emoji face and some
thank you.
heart emojis.
That's great.
A
And
beautiful referential novella.
the historian in me always loves to hear that people are taking annotations and taking notes and trying to find things. I love that. It pleases the historian in me to hear that.
I think it's inevitable with a book like this, and also, and more than that, it's also a joyous act. And I want to talk on this a bit later about how you take a subject that could be so, and is so traumatic and grim and bleak, and make space. It feels like an active and defiant reclamation on the page for wonder, for joy, for humor, for sensuality. I It's all in there. And
Yeah.
but so a pin in that. We're gonna come to that point. But first, I really want to talk about Maurice, who is a delightful protagonist and who you cannot help but root for, knowing how much she is up against, fighting actual primordial evil. I mean, something that struck me about Maurice is the provenance of her mystical sword, which I think you took great care in the book to tell us about the originators of this powerful weapon. And
Yeah.
friends, I promise this is not too much of a spoiler. It's very soon within the book, I swear. Um, and that felt like a very active and conscious choice, that you were seeing a weapon that was forged by Black people who were complicit in the slave trade
Yeah.
was an instrument that had to be used to defend Black people in the here and now of 1922. So I wonder if we could
Right.
talk about that a bit, and that deliberate choice for the weapon.
Yeah. And you were the first person I'm thanking you that's actually asked me and went in that direction about the sword. And I've often wondered, people have talked about the sword, they like the sword.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you're the first person who's pointed out, talked about that complication, which I love, right? Because
I'm glad.
I did create that sword to be complex,
Mm-hmm.
uncomfortable at times, and what it's about, because it is as I say in there, it's a weapon of vengeance and repentance in some ways. And yeah, it's I wanted to, my focus of study is slavery, and so it will come up from time to time because that's what I do in
Mm-hmm.
my day job, focusing on that. And I wanted to really give Maurice something that tied her right back to these long lineages of this, that what she was doing was not simply, and what she was up against was not something new, but it was tied into this older, I want to say, almost dare say, cosmic battle, right?
Yeah.
This long struggle. And so I wanted to root her in that, right? I want to root her in that struggle of slavery. And in some ways here, I'm taking from, Dessalines, when when Dessalines of Haiti, when the Haitian Revolution, and they defeat the French, right? And they rename their island Haiti after the indigenous people who had been there. They don't name it an African name or a French name, but they name it after the indigenous people who had once been there, were pretty much, wiped out by Columbus and everything that had happened. When we think about that period, right, 300 years earlier, that what had begun there on that island and in the Caribbean, and that would spread to the mainland, was this era of colonialism and imperialism that would destroy the indigenous population, result in millions of Africans being bought over to work this land, and just this massive this massive time of oppression and subjugation. And Dessalines, he says, "I've avenged America," right? This is what the Haitian Revolution has done. And what he's saying is they've struck a blow against the entire Western project from its inception, from Columbus to that day, right? And in a way, Maurice's sword kind of reflects some of that, right? It reflects that long held struggle that has been going on, right? It's enslaved people that power the sword, and she sees, I don't want to give away too much myself, but I'm trying to like dance around my words.
Mm-hmm.
But she sees images and almost relives the lives of these enslaved people from across the diaspora, right? From not just in the United States, but the Caribbean, South Latin America, and elsewhere. And she lives their lives, and they're all empowering the sword and kind of calling for, in some ways, vengeance, but also fighting these new fights that have to be fought, right? And so there's a lot to be said about the sword. Like, I'm dancing around my words because when you read it, I think what I'm saying might make more sense because people will be sitting there reading it, but they'll see all the little things I'm leaving out. But yeah, the sword was the sword is almost a character in itself, right? And it was like
Absolutely.
one of my favorite characters to write. Only because again, it comes with such complexities. And one more thing, it does owe again to some of that folklore from those ex-slaves. One of the folklores they had was the folklore of the Old Buzzard. And what the Old Buzzard was supposedly the restless spirit of an African slave trader, right? And so they're talking about this in 1930 something. So it's something that we think about, that enslaved communities themselves discussed and spoke of, and they tried to find a way to deal with that. And so they made it this buzzard was supposedly the spirit of this enslaved person who just had to keep on going through time and was not able to find repentance for what had been done. And I think it's just it just speaks to how much the slave trade itself looms large within the larger diaspora and its monumental importance in many ways.
Thank you. I love this
Yeah.
comment from Pietra Alicia Brown, who says, I love that I came to watch an interview, but instead I'm getting a history class. Yes.
Sorry. Sorry.
No, I think they're happy about it. And we have a great comment from some folks who I believe are some of your biggest fans, Decentered Lit JA.
Hey, yes.
Um, they've said that you're one of their favorite humans. And they say, I remember seeing that quote at the start of the Black Gods drums and having a fully nerd moment.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's it. Yeah. Desaline's quote is always it always sticks with me because it has so much meaning. Yeah.
And another great comment has just come in from Brandon O'Brien, who
Hey,
says,
Brandon.
I mean, can't say enough great things about Brandon, truly. Brandon says,
Definitely.
I'm sure I've become a broken record saying this, but I love that Fenderson's books are so connected to history, not just as an accurate representation of time, but using the fiction to legitimately challenge it and ask complex questions about it. Always worth digging into, studying, contemplating, asking questions alongside them,
Right, yeah.
which is
Thank
a
you, Brandon.
beautiful comment.
Always
Thank
from
you.
Brandon, you know it's going to be.
You do. You just, you know. And if you don't know, you should know.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think this is a great time, Fenderson, for us to talk a little bit about the 100 Caribbean books that
Yes.
made us, which, as you know, is a response to a BBC list about
Hmm.
the 100 novels that shaped our world, which had very few Caribbean offerings. So I'm
Shocking.
curious.
Shocking.
So shocking. I'm really curious about which Caribbean books in any genre would you say have made P. Djèlí Clark, have influenced your imagination
Mm.
profoundly?
Well, first, I have to start off, and I could go get it. My little ladybug reader that I had from from school way back in the day. I still have it somewhere here, but no. It's interesting. My parents would keep certain books in the house. Like my mother would always want me to read V.S. Nepal. She would like, you have to read these
Hmm.
books and so forth. So I know I read those when I was younger, but I don't think that things started influencing me as much probably until later. I think when I could understand some of these works, and I think later on reading like you know Crick Crack. I'm sorry, Edward Dundecat. Works like
Hmm.
that, or Jamaica Kincaid, or even I remember in college I actually sat down and read The Dragon Can't Dance, and I was,
Yes.
you know, and just that understanding of carnival in a way that I'd never thought of it really made me appreciate it more as this social and cultural event. So I think those, and definitely when it comes to speculative fiction, I will say in the beginning is, and I think many marginalized writers will say this, will tell you this, at least those of my age, coming up, we didn't see ourselves in a lot of speculative fiction, or if we did, was in the most flattering ways.
Hmm.
And so you're always looking for yourself in these works. And so it was amazing to me when I first came across writers like Naval Hopkinson, right? And I was like, wait a minute, you can take the culture that I know in my house, right? And that I know when I go back home, you can take this and think of it in a speculative way. And, I remember that just blowing my mind because we've been so taught on what should be speculative fiction and how it should be, that this notion that you could create entire worlds and you could pull on that folklore and meld it into your imagination and the works you want to put forward. That was just really a game changer for me. So definitely, I have to credit. I think when I first read, I think the first story I read by Neil Hopkinson was Greedy Choke Puppy, about a greedy Sukiyante. And after that, I think I
That
read
was it.
everything by her. And so definitely, she was a strong influence in allowing me to open up and think about, the worlds I could build. And so now, no matter what I do, I always do this little trick where if you look at anything, I've thrown a little bit of the Caribbean in there. Like, I don't care if it's a full on fantasy novel in another world, they might be eating some saltfish and bacon. Why not? It's just in there. Just in there, right? Yeah.
I love that. And for anyone who's new to the work of Nalo Hopkinson, this is a good reminder to get
Hmm.
started with her. She's going to take you to some incredible places in your imagination and spirit that I think only Caribbean speculative fiction can do. And I think of those places, I also think of your work now. I mean, I really want to ask some essential questions about what it feels like as both a historian and a creative writer to truly confront evil. And I don't think there's no understating that. Like what you're doing in the work is looking at the KKK imbuing something, a group of people so hateful and enshrined in cruelty, and really using the tools of speculative fiction to drill into that hate and consider that it might have cosmic and horrific origins. Some people who haven't read the book, might see that as a cop out by
Hmm.
making a thing speculative. You can deal with
Right.
it better. But the book does
Yeah.
the complete opposite. And so it made me really curious to know about if you learned anything that truly troubled you in the process of putting that on the page. If you expected a journey
Mm-hmm.
confronting evil that was one thing, but got something else, did the act of writing that reveal anything to you?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think from the first point you make, yeah, there was always a danger that I knew that could exist if I create a world where the Klan are monsters. Because
Mm-hmm.
if they're monsters, then you kind of erase responsibility, right? If they're just monsters. And so, in the work, I strive to make certain that I do this thing between Ku Kluxes and clans. I don't want to give it away, but some people are monsters, and some people are physical, otherworldly monsters, and other people are human monsters. And you can actually decide which one is worse, right? In many ways, and so I think on the one hand, I was wary about that, but then I thought of those ex-slaves who had written this, right? Who I'm pulling from, and I was intrigued with the fact that they themselves used folklore to talk about the
Mm-hmm.
terror that they were living through, right? And so I really used how they discussed these things as a guide, right? So they would talk, for instance, about how the Klan would pretend to drink all of this water, to pretend that they were supernatural, they could drink all this water, and all they knew what was happening. They were well aware, just like they often knew who the members of the Klan were because they lived in those communities, right? And so at the same time, while they talked about them as saints and monsters, they were like, "Oh, that's Judd Johnson, right? Who lives over there? We know who he is.
Mm-hmm.
He was our former owner, or he is the richest man in town, or." And there was this way that I thought was interesting how they did that plurality, where they're monsters, but they're actually human monsters, right? So we understand who they are, but we're going to tell the story in this fantastic way, right? And I guess that gets at the heart of the question of why we sometimes use speculative fiction, why we use folklore to tell truths, right? Why do writers create any type of fiction in the sense, why don't we just give the history straight? Why do we tell fiction? I think there's something in the power of storytelling that engages people in a way and gets them to think perhaps in a way, and maybe sometimes allows them to access things that they may not want to access otherwise straightforward, right? And as a historian, that's great. That's great because I'm often in my teaching capacity, often trying to get people to engage in things that are quite unsavory, things that are quite
Mm-hmm.
traumatic, images that are quite triggering in many different ways. And, that's what I'm trying to get at. But as far as when I was writing it, I think what it did was it reintroduced me to things that in some ways I had buried in
Mm-hmm.
reading some of the ex-slave narratives, because many of them, not only they talk about what they endured during slavery, they talk about the era after slavery and after Reconstruction and enduring the terror of that first Klan. And I had forgotten some of the horrific things that they talk about that happened, right? That they are saying happened to them and their family. And I think going back and reading some of that, and I had to cut a lot of that from the book,
Mm-hmm.
by the way. Like every chapter was supposed to start with a quote, and I cut all those. And I think I left one quote in the foreword. I left one quote there in the dedication. Pardon me, but I think reading all those again just drove home what it was many of these people endured. And I think I went back and I reread a book by an author, Kidada Williams, called They Left Great Marks Upon Me, about African Americans who speak about these horrors that they endured during this time up to World War I, about, you know, the Klan pulling them out at night and whipping them, right? It was just more than lynching. It was constant psychological and physical terror. And, you know, just being immersed in that again was powerful, right? It certainly made me want to have Maurice use her sword more.
You're talking about so much that you had to leave on the cutting floor, but I think you hearken to what is not explicitly always said really, really powerfully. I mean, at every point in Ring Shout, when Tulsa is mentioned, I get actual chills, and the effect that it has on Maurice and her cohort.
Yeah.
But even the mention of it is sometimes too much to hold, too much to think about.
Yeah.
And it just re-energizes you to the point of seeing what they're up against, what they're fighting for. It is a life and death proposition, and the speculative nature doesn't weaken that. It only, I think, solidifies it in complete steel.
Yeah.
I mean,
Definitely. And I think we are living, I'm sorry, I was going to say, I think we're living in this age where I keep saying that if you look at television and everything, people want this, right? I think people want to access these things, and maybe, again, they want to access them differently. And I think they are here for the storytelling. They are here for the folklore. They want to see these perspectives and these ideas in these stories. And I agree with you. I think there's sometimes a critique that it weakens the stories, and I don't think so. I think it brings a lot of people to it. And of course, if people want to, I think people can, that's a great starting point. They want to go read the real histories, and that's fine. But I always, I'm like, I'm not doing history here. I'm doing a creative, it's a different enterprise, right? Than doing history. There's not footnotes in my in my work. And so I agree with you. I think speculative fiction has a great place for this. And I think speculative fiction has always had a place for this. Like, you know, the great question of speculative fiction political, it always has been.
Always. I think, you know, on the subject of trauma and joy, we have a brilliant question from Akila White, who is one of my favorite Caribbean readers. And she asks, there seems to be, perhaps, a more visible trend online of automatically labeling any works set in a particular time period or centered on certain events, whether TV, film, or literature, as being about Black trauma, with even some calls for Hollywood and publishing to focus on producing works about Black joy instead. What are your thoughts on this reaction that comes primarily from Black readers and viewers as the writer of Ring Shout with a TV show in the works?
Yes. Oh boy. You just threw me right into the pit of it. I mean, so I'll say this from the academic side. So one of the I teach a class called Slavery in Film. And what we do is we look at how slavery has been portrayed within the cinematic universe. And we actually start off with, of all things, Birth of a Nation, because that's literally the birth of film right around that time. And we moved chronologically through time. And we mostly do the United States, but we also do films. We do a West African film. We do films from Brazil. We do a film from Cuba. So, you know, we try to mix it up and try to find, you know, as complex films. We do a film by, I'm blanking on him right now, but he's the director of the Battle of Algiers, Pontecorvo. We do a film by him that is supposed to be set in a mythical version of, like, perhaps Haiti or Martinique. We're not certain, but it's supposed to be a version of that. And so the class both talks about the nature of film, histories of slavery, and film theory, right? And how films are made and everything else. And so one of the things that's interesting in teaching that class is that every time a movie would come out in public about slavery, I would get a call from, like, a newspaper or somebody who would want to interview me about it. And they would say, do you think there are too many slave movies? And I would always have to say, like, I get it because you're seeing slave movies, but I would actually have to go to the numbers. And I would say, like, do you realize that of the amount of movies being made overall, movies about slavery are fantastically rare. Even among movies starring Black characters, movies about slavery are extremely rare, right? And especially if you want to divide from older movies like, Gone with the Wind to more modern movies by Black directors, those are like unicorns, right? Those are rare gems. And so, but people, I suppose because they would see it, and because again, I think there's a lot of politics and everything goes into it, people would see those films and they would swear that there were thousands of these films. And I would say, no, I teach it. I'm telling you, there aren't that many because I look for them. I'm hunting them down to talk about in class. And I know that there are very few of them in comparison to other films. And I think, and I use this to say that I'm sorry, my dog has decided to sit right on my feet
Welcome,
right now. Come on, buddy. You gotta
canine
give me a
friend.
break. When he hears me talking, he then thinks I must be talking to him. Okay, sit right
Of
there.
course. Who
So
else?
yeah, and so I say this, I think there should not be, I'm hoping that there's room for both films that engage trauma within the Black community, that engage history, as well as engage joy. Sure, we can use more films about Black joy, more comedies and so forth, definitely. But I also think there is quite a lot of room to talk about all of the other aspects of our multifaceted existence, right? And so I, it's hard for me as a person who studies slavery to, I'm probably sometimes the wrong person to ask about if there's too much Black trauma at the moment, because I suppose I'm immersed in it. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, we have to allow for a multiplicity of perspectives, and we can't erase one in order to get the other. I simply say, if you want to see more stories about Black joy, by all means support them. Um, by all means support those who are creating them, because there are people out there creating them. And if you wish to create that, by all means create that as well. And for those who are doing something different, and perhaps something that who are focusing on trauma or the histories or what have you, I think that deserves support as well. And I speak as this is someone who I tend, like I had a question once where somebody said, as a person who writes about Black trauma, I was like, I don't know if all my stories are that. Like I do it, I'm a little versatile. So
Like,
I'm gonna
really?
hit you with, yeah, I'm gonna do one thing like that, but then the next story might just be a complete comedy. And I'm gonna keep rotating. So as a person who rotates back and forth between those things, I don't really get caught up in the we need one or the other. I am here for all of those stories.
There is a fascinating parallel to the absolute gold that you're dropping
Hmm.
in this conversation in the comment section. So Rebel Woman Lit have said, often people use speculative stories as a way to also process their own trauma. So it's good that we can use it to communicate amongst
Yeah,
ourselves and still understand the gravity of our
yeah.
reality, to which Ayana replied and said, and for me, more than that, we can't act as though there is not a spiritual dimension to everything we see as real. Why on
Hmm.
earth would we think that magic, mysticism, evil, hatred, love would not have cosmic and magical dimensions?
There you go. Okay, that cutting comments are fire. I wish I was there. I could see them, but I don't want to, because then I'll get. But I think in speaking to this, I think it comes back, and you're probably going to circle back to that question in Ring Shout. What I tried to do was, while Ring Shout is about trauma, I also tried to show people living their lives, which is what I always try to get across when I'm teaching about slavery, for instance. I always try to remind my students, these are human beings, right? And so they're suffering, but they also fall in love, and they fight and fuss, and they don't like that person, and they gossip, and they look forward to things, and they enjoy things because they're human beings, right? They're not just a mass of people we call enslaved people or slaves, right? They are human beings with all of the complexities that humanity comes with. And so, even in a work like Ring Shot, where I'm dealing with these heavy bits of trauma, I also want to show that people are living their lives, right? They are also finding ways to enjoy themselves and to do all of the things that human beings do.
You do that so beautifully in the scene that I won't describe too much
Yeah.
because it will give away too much, but where we see some of the major characters at great leisure, in which there is room for this beautiful black queer interaction in the character
Yeah.
of Chef, who is
Hmm.
an open, woman loving war veteran. And this
Yeah.
is something you don't hugely telecast as look at me doing this important thing in the novel, in the novella. It
Yeah.
simply is a fact of that character's existence. And that
Yeah.
speaks to exactly
Hmm.
what you're saying, that these people do have lives that are fraught with the reality of fighting for their freedom.
Yeah.
And they're also living these lives at the same time.
Right. Exactly. They go to the juke joint. They enjoy their music. They have sex. They do everything else. Right. They fight with each other. I mean, Sadie and I love Sadie and Maurice's relationship because it's like this strong friendship, but they also can't stand each other at
Mm-hmm.
times. But they're still friends, and so they're comrades in many ways, but they also have antagonisms. And I wanted to get at that rather than make these flat characters and archetypes in many ways, that they are complex people.
I think it's a great time to hear more from them. I'm going to invite you to do your
Oh,
second reading.
do more
Thank
reading.
you. Yes,
Okay.
please.
How much time do I have? 5 minutes. Okay. So let me see, where did I leave off? Okay, it's right after they've seen the dog chopped up in the alley. You have to chop it up like that, I ask, my belly unsettled. Chef shrugs. You want to catch bees, you got to put out enough honey. Like how Bruh Fox catch Bruh Rabbit, I imagine my brother saying. Look like all we catching is flies, Sadie mutters. She leans over the ledge to spit tobacco with the carcass, missing wide. I cut my eyes to her. Could you be more respectful? Sadie scrunches up her face, chewing harder. Dog dead. Spit won't hurt it none. Still, we can try not to be vulgar. She snorts, carrying on over a dog when we put down worse. I open my mouth, then decide answering ain't worth the bother. Make it not missing another stray, Chef says. If it helps, old girl never saw her end coming. She pats the German trench knife at her waist, her prized souvenir. It don't help. We take the staring dog, the hurly burly of the parade at our backs and our ears. I wonder why Ku Kluxers like dogs, Sadie asks, breaking our quiet. Seared but bloody, Chef adds. Roasted that one on a spit. That's what I'm saying. Why dog and not say chicken or hogs? Maybe they ain't got chickens where they come from, or hogs. Just got dogs. Or something that tastes like dog. My belly could do without this particular conversation, but when Sadie on a rant, let's just ride it out. Maybe I should have put some pepper and spices on it, Chef jokes. Sadie waves her off. White folk don't care about pepper and spices, like they food bland as water. Chef squints over her high cheekbones as loud skyrockets go off, followed by the booms of gas battle bombs. I don't know. When we was in France, them Frenchies could put their foot on up in some food. Sadie's eyes narrow. You talking rats again, Cordy? Not in the trenches, in Paris, where we was after the armistice. Frenchy gals love cooking for colored soldiers. Like doing the heat more than cooking, too. She flashes the wink and smile of a rogue. Had us some steak tartare and cassoulet, duck confit, ratatouille. Sadie, fix your face, ratatouille not made from rats. Sadie don't look convinced. Well, don't know what type of white folk they got in France, but the ones they got here don't put no proper seasoning in their food unless they got niggers to do so for them. Her eyes widen. I wonder what niggers smell like, the Ku Kluxes. You think niggers smell like burnt dogs to their noses, and that's why they come after us so? I wonder if there's even niggers where they from, and if Sadie, I snap, losing what little patience I got. Heaven knows I asked you more than once to stop using that word, at least in my presence. That yellow gal rolls her eyes so hard at me it's a wonder she don't fall asleep. Why you fretting, Maurice? Always says my niggers with a big N. I glare at her. And that makes a difference, how? She has the gall to frown like I'm simple. Why, with the big N, it's respectful like. Seeing me at a loss, Chef intervenes. And how can we tell if you're using a big N or a common N? Now Sadie takes to staring at both of us, like we don't understand 2 plus 2 is 4. Why would I use a small N, nigga? That's insulting. I can see Chef Stump now too. They could get all the scientists the world over to try and figure out how Sadie's mind works. Wouldn't do no good. Chef soldiers on anyway. So can white folk ever use a big N, nigga? Sadie shakes her head as if this is all settled scriptures written down between Leviticus and Deuteronomy. Never. White folk always mean the small N. And if they try to say it with the big N, you should put their front teeth in the back of their mouth. Honestly, you two. What kind of niggas even need to ask me that? I purse my lips up into their full rounded glory, set to tell her exactly what kind. But Chef holds up a fist and we drop to peer over the rooftop wall. There's 3 Ku Kluxes entering the alley. They dressed in white robes with the hoods pulled up. The first one is tall and lanky with an Adam's apple I can spot from here. His eyes dart around the alley while a nose like a beak sniffs the air. When he spots the dog carcass, he slinks over, still sniffing. The 2 other Ku Kluxes, one short and portly, the other a broad-chested block of muscle, soon join him. I can tell right off there's something peculiar about them. Not just those silly costumes neither, or because they sniffing at a chopped up half-burnt dog like a regular folk sniff at a meal. They don't walk right, all jerky and stiff, and they breathing too fast. Those things anybody can notice if they're paying attention. But what only a few can see, people like me, Sadie, and Chef, is the way the faces on these men move. And I mean move. They don't stay still for nothing, wobbling, twisting about like reflections in those funny mirrors at Carnival. The first Ku Klux goes down on all fours, palms flat and back legs bent so he's raised up on his toes. He sticks out a tongue to take a long lick at the dog carcass, smearing his lips and chin bloody. A growl in the back of his throat sends a tickle up my spine. Then with a quickness, he opens his mouth full and plunges teeth first into the carcass, tearing out and swallowing chunks of dog meat. The other 2 scramble over on all fours, all of them feeding at once. It makes my stomach do somersaults. I think I gotta stop there, 5 minutes. So yeah.
Well, folks, I mean, if you haven't put Ring Shout on your radar, on your bookshelf, or as the gateway to a whole world of research, joyful research, I think this is a clear sign that you need to do that. And we, of course, we can't let Fenderson go before he plays our game, our Bios and
Oh,
Bookmarks
yeah.
game,
I
Read,
heard about
Write,
this.
Read, Write, and Avoid, where we try to bring a little bit of provocative levity to the proceedings. So, the premise of the game is simple. We're going to present our guest with a scenario made just for them, and they're going to let us know if they would rather read about it, written by somebody else, write it themselves, or avoid the whole thing entirely. So here is Fenderson's scenario. Fenderson, would
Mm-hmm.
you read, write, or avoid a screenplay for a feature film called The Unbirthening of a Nation, a slasher zombie satire where
Okay.
racists get their comeuppance in the heart of the antebellum?
All
Oh, and
right.
just one thing, you also have to play the leading role.
Okay. All right. Oh, so now I get to answer. Let's
Read,
see.
write, or
So
avoid.
read, right, or so I think with this one, I'm gonna have to write it, and I'm gonna have to take some acting lessons because yeah, I'll have to be the lead role then. Yeah, that's just too much
Awesome.
fun. That's too much fun. I couldn't pass that up. Couldn't pass it up. So yeah, I'll need my acting lessons. So I'll have
Mhm.
to look for somebody. Yeah, maybe John Boyega or somebody can give me some pointers.
Awesome. We're glad to hear that you're up for the challenge. And, in an
Yeah.
alternate reality, we would expect to be seeing you on the big screen.
All right. All right. Yes.
I want to
Yes.
thank you
You want
so
to be in it
much.
too? I take it. Okay. Go on now.
Uh,
Go on down.
there have been requests to see the dog actually before we
Oh
end.
well. There he is. There is the dog.
Okay, everyone, this is a
There
Bios and
he is.
Bookmarks first. We have a canine guest along
This
with our
is
human
this
guest.
is Barris the Boston.
Barris,
Yes,
welcome.
he's named after that Barris.
Welcome to the program. I want to say thank you so much, Fenderson, for being our guest, for
Thank
reading
you.
so generously and sharing with everyone here. I think I speak for myself and everyone in the comments. This is one of the fieriest, pepperiest comment sections I've seen for any of our shows,
I
and
can't wait. I want to go look.
definitely
I'm
do
gonna go
that.
lurk. I'm gonna go lurk in a bit.
Thank you for joining us, and to everyone who tuned in, thank you so much as well for
Yes.
being here for Bios and Bookmarks, powered by the NGC Bocas Lit Fest. We're going to be back next week at the same time on the same day. Until then, everyone, enjoy your embodiment of Carnival, however you do it. They can't kill Carnival. Save the dates for the upcoming Bocas 2021, hashtag Bocas 2021, and be safe and take care. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.